In the midst of much grief and loss this year, I will be discussing how mourning has been framed in a selection of poetic and religious texts, and then review some recommendations from the field of medicine and psychology on what you can do to help others who have experienced great sorrow or loss. Today, I want to start with a reading from the Book of Qualities by J. Ruth Gendler. This is one of my favorite books of poetry. In it, each emotion is personified as a character in a story. Here is the character named Grief. Grief. Before she came to this town, Grief was a woman named Elia. She was a potter, and she glazed her big-bellied pots with earth colors until they shone like dull bronze. She had 4 children. The daughters live inland now in the distant foothills. The oldest son left the family as soon as he could get away. It was the youngest boy with the golden curls and the laughing eyes who gave her great joy. He loved the ocean. He was barely walking when he learned to swim and not much older when he learned to sail. One day about 2 years ago, the sailors brought his boat home empty. Never have I heard such sounds of weeping as when Grief found out her son had drowned. She screamed and howled. She stamped her feet and smashed her pots and bowls. She ate with all her fingers. She tore at her hair, and it grew wild and matted. She wandered from place to place with no sense of where she was or how she came there. One day at the edge of the forest, Grief heard another woman crying out. She spoke with her. She listened to her story. Grief was surprised. She had never met anyone else who had suffered as she had. Together, the women sat in the clearing and mourned their children. Through the long afternoon, through the twilight, through the night, they wept and wept and wept and wept. In the morning, Grief was washed clean of her tears. She came to our town and started to do her real work. So let's say that you are a friend of the woman named Grief, and you find out through a mutual acquaintance that Grief's son has died. You will feel shock, sadness, and empathy for Grief. Many of you will reach out to Grief and tell her how sorry you are and that if she needs anything, you are here for her. Some will send flowers and food. Some will offer to be present with her. Perhaps you have never personally known a loss so great. You may also feel the same sadness and empathy, but will feel paralyzed by the strong emotions that such great loss brings up and will not contact your friend at all. You may be afraid to say the wrong thing or worried that you may upset your friend at an inopportune public moment. You want to do something, but you are concerned that your actions will accidentally do more harm than good, and so you avoid the difficult topic altogether. These are all common reactions to such an overwhelmingly sad event. And I am sure there are a lot of people who are reflecting on their actions to this scenario and felt like they wish they could do more. Today's discussion will be of help to you. Today I would like to share insights on how those who are grieving are typically consoled. I would first like to turn to some historical religious texts for viewpoints on the origins of a lot of our mainstream Western customs surrounding death. Simply for the sake of time, not for importance, I will only be exploring the Old Testament and only drawing parallels to mainstream American practices. So in multiple instances of the Old Testament, a period of 7 days, or Shiva in Hebrew, of mourning is described as an appropriate time to be with the grieving. In Genesis, Joseph mourns his father for 7 days. In the book of Job, Job's friends come and comfort him as they mourn the death of his 10 children while he is writhing in pain and smitten with boils. The Talmud explains the 7 days of mourning as the complement to the 7 days of rejoicing during the holidays of Passover and Sukkot. In a more mystical tone, the Talmud also explains that the soul of a person mourns over its own body for 7 days. In the strict originalist interpretation of Job and his friends, mourners were required to sit Shiva on the floor or on low stools as a way to show their disregard for their own comfort in a time of intense grief. And so from these passages and probable ancient practices predating the Old Testament, we derive the customs of sitting Shiva. If you have ever been to a Jewish household sitting Shiva, As with all things today, you will find various levels of adherence to the liturgical customs, but you will find one thing in common: a community that has come together around a family who is mourning the death of a loved one. People bring food, sometimes small gifts, and always their kind words. Some families will be incredibly quiet and somber. Others will be filled with laughter as people relish in the fond memories of the deceased. What I think is important to take out of the origins of sitting Shiva is that healthy grieving takes way more than one day and requires one to receive love, comfort, and emotional nourishment from their friends in order to slowly return to a functioning life and place in society. So, I was raised in a blended Jewish and Protestant household. One of the remarkable parts of my childhood was being able to see how most of the customs between my extended families were essentially the same with different names. My mother's family, all New England Congregationalists, would essentially sit Shiva. We would just call it a wake. And after that wake, we would have copious amounts of food, flowers, and gifts everywhere. And the cousins from Michigan would stay the week and make sure we were fed and the house was kept clean. From my view as a child, I loved funerals. It was the only time I could reliably see extended family for a long period of time and all at once. Everyone was feeding me comforting food, and in the classic waspy New England form, it was one of the only times everyone in my family was emotionally available to support one another. Although the cookies and fruit platters and bagels were enjoyed, in retrospect, it is clear that it was the greater than normal outpouring of love that made family funerals more associated with joy than sorrow, even though someone I loved just died. So, there you have some of the foundations of traditions in Western culture that help console the grieving. If you struggle with how to help those in mourning, what I've outlined so far is possibly helpful as a guide on how to show your love through actions. But more often, the harder part is still knowing what to say in those difficult conversations. So I will now tell you about two relatively easy things you can do. One, offer validation. Two, give therapeutic silence. These two skills are the basics of what clinicians learn in their early schooling when developing their bedside manner. First, validation. Validation is the practice of verbalizing acceptance of someone's emotions without further judgment. It requires you to be present and actively listen and watch the person to whom you are speaking, ensuring that you are comprehending their words, tone, and body language. Validation also offers you a way to simultaneously keep the conversation focused on the speaker and allows them to feel heard. Some examples of phrases to use include, "That sounds like a really difficult situation," or "I can see why that made you upset," or "I completely understand why you haven't been around lately. Processing such a large loss is going to take anybody a long time. Please know we all care about you." It's important that you are staying an active listener in the conversation so that you are not just throwing learned phrases at your friend. Watch their body language and listen for a quiver in their voice. You want to make them feel heard, and you want to help them feel that their thoughts and emotions are valid and acknowledged. Validation allows you to be empathetic without using trite phrases like, "I'm sorry," and without needing to have lived their experience to talk to them about it. Most importantly, it allows you to offer consolation without sharing a similar circumstance that may one-up them and inadvertently turn attention onto yourself. That brings me to therapeutic silence. Therapeutic silence is almost a more indirect form of validation. I like to think of it as a meditation where you clear your mind to focus your attention on the other person's body and voice rather than your own. This is how it is different than just sitting next to someone and not talking, which is awkward. Instead, you absorb yourself in the speaker's words, tone, speed, inflection, and body language so that they understand, without you saying a word, that you are there with them and offering your full support and attention. I want to reiterate how important it is in both of these modalities to not overshare about your own experiences. Just stay quiet and be with them. Keep the focus and direction of your love and support toward the person in need. This is what they need from you when they make themselves vulnerable and emotional, and it is how you can heal your friends and loved ones. This is how good nurses, doctors, and therapists work their magic. So, let's say you are speaking with the woman from the story I started with, the woman named Grief, who has lost her youngest son to the hungry grasp of the ocean. She is recounting her story to you. Previously paralyzed by your anxiety from saying the wrong thing, you now have some tools to work with. So face her, look into her eyes, and you can say, Grief, that is such tragic news. It sounds like you loved him very much, and you were an amazing mother to him. This must be a very difficult time for you and your family right now. Know that you can always talk to me about it more when you're ready. If she continues, remember to be present, offer your silence. Hopefully, you can all go and use these methods to bring more love and light to all of your friends, neighbors, and loved ones who surely need it after a year full of loss that we have all collectively experienced. Keep in mind that it takes emotional vulnerability on your part to be present with someone in their grief. Be sure to practice your own self-care when caring for others. In closing, I would like to offer another poem. This is For Grief by John O'Donohue. When you lose someone you love, your life becomes strange. The ground beneath you becomes fragile. Your thoughts make your eyes unsure. And some dead echo drags your voice down, where words have no confidence. Your heart has grown heavy with loss. And though this loss has wounded others too, no one knows what has been taken from you when the silence of absence deepens. Flickers of guilt kindle regret for all that was left unsaid or undone. There are days when you wake up happy, again inside the fullness of life, until the moment breaks and you are thrown back onto the black tide of loss. Days when you have your heart back, you are able to function well, until in the middle of work or an encounter, suddenly with no warning, you are ambushed by grief. It becomes hard to trust yourself. All you can depend on now is that sorrow will remain faithful to itself. More than you, it knows its way and will find the right time to pull and pull the rope of grief until that coiled hill of tears has reduced to its last drop. Gradually, you will learn acquaintance with the invisible form of your departed. And when the work of grief is done, the wounds of loss will heal, and you will have learned to wean your eyes from that gap in the air and be able to enter the hearth in your soul where your loved one has awaited your return all this time.